It was a crisp October morning in 2024 when demolition worker Mike Rodriguez struck his crowbar against something that would unravel one of America's most haunting unsolved mysteries. What started as a routine school demolition in Millbrook, Connecticut, would become the breakthrough that investigators had been waiting for since 1994. Mike had been tasked with clearing out the old classrooms of Lincoln Elementary School before the building was torn down to make way for a new community center. The 1960s-era school had been abandoned for 3 years, its hallways echoing only with memories of thousands of children who had walked its corridors over 6 decades. "Hey, Tony!" Mike called out to his supervisor as he pried open an old wooden desk that had been wedged behind a radiator. "You gotta see this." Inside the desk, carved deep into the wood with what appeared to be a pencil or small knife, were the words, "Help me, Jamie Morrison, 1994. Below it, scratched in smaller letters, "They took me to the basement." Tony Castellanos, a 20-year veteran of construction and demolition, had seen his share of strange discoveries in old buildings. But something about these particular scratches made his blood run cold. The desperation in the carving was palpable, and the name Jamie Morrison rang a bell he couldn't quite place. "Mike," Tony said slowly, "I think we need to call the police." Within 2 hours, the Millbrook Police Department had cordoned off the entire classroom. Detective Sarah Chen, who had been with the department for 12 years, arrived at the scene already knowing the significance of what had been found. Jamie Morrison, she told the construction workers, was an 8-year-old boy who vanished from this very school 30 years ago. This is the first physical evidence we've ever found related to his disappearance. And then, the Jamie Morrison case was legendary in Connecticut law enforcement circles. It was the kind of case that haunted every detective who worked on it, the kind that made veteran officers question everything they thought they knew about child safety and school security. But to understand the magnitude of this discovery, we need to go back to that ordinary Tuesday in November 1994, when a bright third grader named Jamie Morrison walked into Lincoln Elementary School and simply vanished without a trace. November 15th, 1994, dawned grey and chilly in Millbrook, Connecticut. It was the kind of late autumn day that made everyone think about Thanksgiving, just over a week away. 8-year-old Jamie Morrison had eaten his usual breakfast of cereal and orange juice, grabbed his blue backpack, and given his mother the customary kiss goodbye before walking the 4 blocks to Lincoln Elementary School. Jamie was a quiet, thoughtful boy with sandy brown hair and curious green eyes. His teacher, Mrs. Patricia Wells, often commented on his exceptional reading ability and his tendency to ask insightful questions that surprised adults. He was the kind of child who collected rocks, read encyclopedia entries for fun, and spent hours drawing elaborate maps of imaginary worlds. Jamie was what we called an old soul, Mrs. Wells would later tell investigators. He had this way of observing everything around him, like he was studying the world. He was never disruptive, always helpful, and incredibly bright. Jamie lived with his mother, Linda Morrison, a single parent who worked as a nurse at Millbrook General Hospital. His father had left when Jamie was 2 years old, and Linda had raised her son alone, with fierce determination and boundless love. Despite their modest circumstances, she made sure Jamie had everything he needed for school and encouraged his love of learning. "Jamie was my whole world," Linda would say years later, her voice still breaking with emotion. "He was such a good boy, so responsible for his age. He'd come home from school and immediately do his homework, then help me with dinner. He never gave me a moment's trouble." That Tuesday morning started like any other. Jamie arrived at school at 8:15 a.m., hung his backpack in his assigned cubby, and took his seat in Mrs. Wells' third-grade classroom. The morning proceeded normally through math, reading, and social studies. Jamie participated in class discussions, completed his worksheets, and showed no signs of distress or unusual behavior. The pivotal moment came at 11:30 a.m. during the transition between social studies and lunch. "Class, please line up for lunch," Mrs. Wells announced, as she had done countless times before. "Remember to walk quietly in the hallway." 22 students began gathering their things and forming a line at the classroom door. Mrs. Wells did her usual head count as the children lined up. 1, 2, 3. She reached 21. "Wait," she said, recounting. "Jamie, where are you?" Jamie's desk was empty. His pencil lay on top of his completed social studies worksheet, as if he had just finished and stepped away for a moment. His backpack was still in his cubby. His jacket hung on his chair. "Did anyone see Jamie leave the room?" Mrs. Wells asked the class. 21 third graders looked around at each other, confused. No one had seen Jamie get up from his desk. No one had seen him leave the room. No one had noticed anything unusual at all. "He was here during social studies," offered Melissa Chen, who sat next to Jamie. "He helped me with the map exercise. Then Mrs. Wells said to line up, and when I looked over, his seat was empty." Mrs. Wells felt the first flutter of real concern. In 15 years of teaching, she had never had a student simply vanish from her classroom without anyone noticing. "Perhaps he went to the bathroom," she told herself. Though she couldn't recall giving Jamie permission to leave the room, she instructed her class to wait in line while she stepped into the hallway to check the boys' restroom. "Jamie," she called out, "are you in there?" Silence. Mrs. Wells asked her colleague across the hall, Mr. Roberts, to watch her class while she conducted a more thorough search. She checked the boys' restroom again, the supply closet, the coat area, and even looked under desks in case Jamie was playing some kind of unusual hide-and-seek game. Nothing. By 11:45 a.m., Mrs. Wells was genuinely worried. She sent her class to lunch with Mr. Roberts and headed directly to the principal's office. "Mrs. Davidson," she said to Principal Eleanor Davidson, a woman who had run Lincoln Elementary with quiet efficiency for 12 years. "I have a serious problem. Jamie Morrison has disappeared from my classroom." Principal Davidson, who had dealt with her share of wandering students over the years, asked the obvious questions. Did he have permission to go somewhere? Could he be in the nurse's office? Did he seem upset about anything? "No to all of those," Mrs. Wells replied. "One moment he was at his desk working on social studies, the next moment he was gone. None of the other children saw him leave." Principal Davidson immediately initiated the school's missing student protocol. She called the main office over the intercom. "Mrs. Patterson, we need to do a complete search of the building immediately. Jamie Morrison from Mrs. Wells's class is unaccounted for." What followed was the most intensive search in Lincoln Elementary's history. Every teacher, administrator, custodian, and support staff member participated. They searched every classroom, every bathroom, every closet, every storage area, every possible hiding place in the building. They checked the gymnasium, the cafeteria, the library, the computer lab, the art room, the music room. They searched the boiler room, the maintenance areas, the principal's office, the nurse's office. They looked in cabinets large enough to hold a child, under stairwells, in supply rooms. "Jamie Morrison, please come to the main office," came the announcement over the PA system every few minutes. "Jamie Morrison, please report to the main office immediately." But Jamie Morrison was nowhere to be found. At 12:30 p.m., exactly 1 hour after Jamie's disappearance was discovered, Principal Davidson made the call that every school administrator dreads. She contacted the Millbrook Police Department. "This is Eleanor Davidson at Lincoln Elementary School," she told the dispatcher. "We have a missing child. 8-year-old Jamie Morrison disappeared from his classroom approximately 1 hour ago. We've searched the entire building and cannot locate him." Officer Michael Torres was the first to arrive at the scene. A father of 2 young children himself, Officer Torres understood the urgency of the situation. Every minute that passed reduced the chances of finding Jamie quickly and safely. When was Jamie last seen? Officer Torres asked Mrs. Wells. At approximately 11:25 a.m., she replied. He was at his desk working on a social studies worksheet. When I called the class to line up for lunch at 11:30, his seat was empty. That's a 5-minute window, Officer Torres noted. In 5 minutes, how far could an 8-year-old boy go? It was a question that would haunt investigators for the next 30 years. Officer Torres immediately called for backup and initiated an expanded search that extended beyond the school building. Within an hour, 6 police officers were searching the school grounds, nearby streets, and surrounding neighborhood. They found no trace of Jamie Morrison. At 2:15 p.m., Linda Morrison received the phone call that every parent fears most. "Ms. Morrison," said Principal Davidson, her voice carefully controlled. "This is Eleanor Davidson from Lincoln Elementary. I need you to come to the school immediately. There's been an incident involving Jamie." "What kind of incident?" Linda asked, her nurse's training automatically making her think of injuries. "Is he hurt? Does he need to go to the hospital?" "Ms. Morrison, Jamie is missing. We can't find him anywhere in the school, and the police are here searching for him. I need you to come right away." Linda Morrison felt the world tilt around her. "Missing? What do you mean, missing? How can he be missing from school?" "Please just come as quickly as you can," Principal Davidson replied. "We'll explain everything when you get here." Linda left her shift at the hospital immediately, her hands shaking as she drove the familiar route to her son's school. When she arrived, the sight of police cars in the parking lot made her legs nearly give out. Detective Ray Kowalski, a 25-year veteran who specialized in missing persons cases, was waiting to interview Linda. His gentle manner couldn't hide the gravity of the situation. "Ms. Morrison," Detective Kowalski said, "I want you to know that we have every available officer searching for Jamie, but I need to ask you some questions that might help us find him." "Of course," Linda replied, though her voice sounded foreign to her own ears. "Anything." "Has Jamie ever wandered off before? Has he ever left school without permission?" "Never," Linda answered emphatically. "Jamie is the most responsible child you could imagine. He's never even been late for anything. He wouldn't just leave school." "Has he seemed upset about anything lately? Problems at school, with friends, anything at home?" "No, nothing. Jamie loves school. He was excited this morning about a book report he's working on. Detective, something terrible has happened to my son. Jamie wouldn't just disappear." Detective Kowalski had been investigating missing children cases for over a decade. In his experience, there were usually logical explanations. Children who got confused and went to the wrong classroom, kids who decided to go home early and got lost, students who were upset about something and hid somewhere in the school. But the Jamie Morrison case was different from the beginning. The child had vanished from a supervised classroom during regular school hours without anyone seeing him leave, leaving all his belongings behind. In Detective Kowalski's experience, that didn't happen accidentally. "Ms. Morrison," the detective said carefully, "I have to ask this question, and I know it's difficult. Is there anyone who might want to take Jamie? An ex-husband, former boyfriend, estranged family member?" "Jamie's father left when he was 2, Linda replied. "He's never shown any interest in seeing Jamie. There's no one in my life who would do something like this. Everyone loves Jamie." By 4 p.m., the search had expanded to include K-9 units, additional detectives, and volunteers from the community. The story had reached local news stations, and Jamie's school photo was broadcast across Connecticut. 8-year-old Jamie Morrison disappeared from his classroom at Lincoln Elementary School in Millbrook this morning, reported Channel 8 News. "Police are asking anyone with information about Jamie's whereabouts to contact the Millbrook Police Department immediately. The first 24 hours of a missing child case are crucial, and Detective Kowalski coordinated a search effort that covered a 5-mile radius around the school. They searched wooded areas, checked every abandoned building, knocked on doors throughout the neighborhood, and interviewed hundreds of people. The search dogs picked up Jamie's scent in the hallway outside his classroom, but the trail ended abruptly at the school's main entrance. This suggested that Jamie had left the building, but how and with whom remained a mystery. The scent trail stopping at the entrance indicates that Jamie likely left the school in a vehicle, explained Sergeant Lisa Chen, the K-9 unit supervisor. If he had walked away, the dogs would have been able to track him much further. This revelation shifted the investigation's focus dramatically. If Jamie had left school in a vehicle, it meant he had either gone willingly with someone he knew or had been taken against his will by a stranger. We're now treating this as a potential abduction, Detective Kowalski announced to the media on the second day of the search. We're asking anyone who was in the area of Lincoln Elementary School between 11 a.m. and 12 p.m. on November 15th to contact us, especially if they saw any unfamiliar vehicles or noticed anything unusual. The investigation quickly expanded to examine everyone who had access to the school. Teachers, administrators, custodial staff, substitute teachers, delivery personnel, maintenance workers, anyone who could have entered the building that day was interviewed and their backgrounds thoroughly checked. School security footage was minimal in 1994. Lincoln Elementary had only 2 cameras, one at the main entrance and one in the main hallway. The footage from November 15th showed Jamie entering the school at 8:15 a.m. with the other students, but there was no image of him leaving. Either Jamie left through an exit that wasn't covered by cameras, or the person who took him knew exactly where the cameras were located, Detective Kowalski noted. Mrs. Wells was interviewed multiple times about the moments leading up to Jamie's disappearance. She reconstructed the morning in minute detail, trying to remember every interaction, every movement in the classroom. Jamie was working on a worksheet about Native American tribes, she recalled. He had finished the questions and was drawing a picture of a longhouse at the bottom of the page. He was concentrating so intently on his drawing that he had his tongue sticking out slightly. You know how children do when they're really focused. Was anyone else in your classroom that morning? Any visitors, parent volunteers, maintenance staff? No one, Mrs. Wells replied firmly. It was just me and my 22 students. No interruptions, no visitors, nothing unusual until I realized Jamie was gone. As days turned into weeks, the investigation took on a more methodical approach. Detectives created a timeline of everyone who had been in the school that day, cross-referenced with anyone who had shown unusual interest in Jamie or other children. One lead that generated significant attention was a maintenance worker named Robert Sullivan, who had been in the school the week before Jamie's disappearance, working on the heating system. Sullivan had no criminal record, but several teachers mentioned that he had been asking unusual questions about school schedules and security procedures. When detectives located Sullivan for questioning, they discovered he had left town abruptly on November 16th, the day after Jamie's disappearance. This made him the primary suspect for several weeks. However, further investigation revealed that Sullivan had been offered a job in Florida and had been planning his move for several weeks before Jamie disappeared. His alibi for November 15th was solid. He had been working at another school district across town during the time of Jamie's disappearance. Another lead involved a white van that several witnesses reported seeing parked near the school around the time of Jamie's disappearance. The van had no license plate visible, and descriptions of the driver varied significantly among witnesses. We followed up on over 200 white van sightings, Detective Kowalski later recalled. None of them led anywhere productive. It's possible the van was completely unrelated to Jamie's disappearance. The case gained national attention when it was featured on America's Most Wanted 3 months after Jamie's disappearance. The episode generated over 500 tips, But despite extensive follow-up investigations, none provided the breakthrough that would solve the case. Linda Morrison became a tireless advocate for her missing son. She organized search parties, distributed flyers, appeared on television programs, and maintained a website dedicated to finding Jamie. Her life became consumed by the search for her child. "I wake up every morning thinking this might be the day I get him back," Linda said in a television interview 1 year after Jamie's disappearance. "I go to bed every night wondering where he is, if he's safe, if he knows I'm looking for him." The psychological toll on the Lincoln Elementary community was enormous. Parents questioned the safety of their children, teachers second-guessed every moment students were out of their sight, and the administration implemented extensive new security measures. The Jamie Morrison case changed everything about how we think about school security, Principal Davidson said years later. "Before Jamie disappeared, we trusted that children were safe within our walls. After Jamie, we realized that trust wasn't enough. The new protocols were immediately implemented. No student could leave a classroom without a written hall pass. All exterior doors were locked during school hours with entry restricted to the main office. Visitor check-in procedures were drastically tightened, and security cameras were installed throughout the building. But for Linda Morrison, no amount of improved security could bring back her son or answer the question that tormented her every waking moment: what had happened to Jamie? As the first anniversary of Jamie's disappearance approached, Detective Kowalski was forced to acknowledge a painful reality. The case was growing cold. Despite thousands of hours of investigation, hundreds of interviews, and extensive searches, they were no closer to finding Jamie Morrison than they had been on the day he vanished. "This is not a closed case," Detective Kowalski emphasized to the media. "We continue to follow every lead, investigate every tip, and pursue every possibility. Jamie Morrison is still out there somewhere, and we will not stop looking for him." But privately, after 12 months of intensive investigation, Detective Kowalski feared that they might never know what happened to the 8-year-old boy who had simply vanished from his classroom on an ordinary Tuesday morning. The case file grew thick with reports, interviews, and dead-end leads. Over the years, new detectives were assigned to review the case, bringing fresh eyes and new techniques to the investigation. DNA technology improved, databases expanded, and investigative methods evolved, but the essential mystery remained unsolved. Jamie's classmates grew up, graduated from Lincoln Elementary, attended middle school and high school, went to college, started careers and families of their own, but they never forgot the boy who had sat among them one morning and was gone by lunch. "We all knew something terrible had happened," said Melissa Chen, Jamie's former deskmate, in a 2019 interview. "Even as 8-year-olds, we understood that children don't just disappear. It changed all of us. We never felt completely safe again." Mrs. Wells retired from teaching 5 years after Jamie's disappearance, unable to shake the guilt and responsibility she felt for losing one of her students. "I replay that morning over and over," she said. "I keep thinking there must have been something I missed, some sign that Jamie was in danger." Linda Morrison never remarried, never had other children, and never gave up hope that her son would come home. She kept Jamie's room exactly as he had left it, celebrated his birthday every year with a cake he would never eat, and continued to believe that somewhere, somehow, Jamie was alive and trying to find his way back to her. "A mother knows," Linda would say, when people gently suggested that perhaps it was time to accept that Jamie was gone. "I would know if my son was dead. He's out there somewhere." As the years passed, the Jamie Morrison case became one of those legendary unsolved mysteries that haunted law enforcement. New detectives would review the file, hoping to find something their predecessors had missed. Cold case units would periodically reopen the investigation when new technologies became available. But the essential facts never changed, An 8-year-old boy had vanished from a supervised classroom in broad daylight without anyone seeing him leave, without a trace of evidence, without a single credible lead that led to answers. The case spawned numerous theories. Jamie had been abducted by someone familiar with the school's layout. He had wandered into a part of the building that hadn't been properly searched and had met with some kind of accident. He had been taken by someone who had been watching him and planning the abduction, or he had somehow left the school grounds and met with foul play elsewhere. But theories weren't facts, and facts were what Detective Kowalski and his successors desperately needed. As Lincoln Elementary aged and enrollment declined, the building eventually closed in 2021. The classrooms where Jamie Morrison had learned to read, where he had raised his hand to answer questions, where he had simply vanished one Tuesday morning, sat empty for 3 years. And then, on that October morning in 2024, Mike Rodriguez pried open an old desk and found the words that would change everything. "Help me, Jamie Morrison, 1994. 30 years after his disappearance, Jamie Morrison was finally speaking to the world again, and what he had to say would shatter everything investigators thought they knew about the case that had haunted them for 3 decades. The scratched message in the desk wasn't just evidence, it was a voice from the past, telling a story of terror that had been hidden in plain sight for 30 years. And the reference to the basement would lead investigators to discoveries that were far more disturbing than anyone had imagined. After 3 decades of silence, Jamie Morrison was about to reveal the truth about what had happened in Lincoln Elementary School on November 15, 1994, and that truth would prove to be more horrifying than anyone had dared to fear. The Connecticut State Police Crime Scene Investigation Unit had processed thousands of cases over the decades, but when they arrived at Lincoln Elementary School on that October afternoon in 2024, they knew they were about to uncover something extraordinary. Detective Sarah Chen had called in every available resource for what could be the most significant breakthrough in Connecticut's most famous cold case. "This changes everything we thought we knew about Jamie Morrison's disappearance," Detective Chen told the assembled team of forensic specialists. "If his message is accurate, he wasn't taken away from the school immediately. He was held somewhere in this building." Dr. Emily Rodriguez, the state's leading forensic pathologist, carefully examined the carved message in the desk. The scratches were deep and desperate, made with considerable force and determination. "These marks were made by someone in extreme distress," she observed. "The depth and urgency of the carving suggests genuine terror." "But how is that possible?" asked Detective Mike Sullivan, who had been assigned to review the Jamie Morrison case files. "The entire school was searched multiple times in 1994. Every room, every closet, every possible hiding place." "That's what we need to find out," Detective Chen replied. "We're going to search this building like it's never been searched before. 30 years of new technology, new techniques, and new eyes on an old mystery." The reference to the basement in Jamie's message was particularly puzzling to investigators familiar with Lincoln Elementary. According to architectural plans from the 1960s, the school had been built on a concrete slab foundation with no basement level. "The original construction documents clearly show no basement," said Building Inspector Tom Walsh, who had brought the school's complete architectural history. "This building was constructed in 1963 on a slab foundation. There's no basement level indicated in any of the blueprints, but architectural plans from 1963 might not tell the whole story." Dr. Patricia Hayes, a forensic archaeologist from Yale University, had been called in to conduct ground-penetrating radar surveys of the building. "Sometimes buildings have hidden spaces, forgotten rooms, or areas that were sealed off during later renovations," Dr. Hayes explained as she set up her equipment. "If Jamie Morrison was held in this building for any length of time, there had to be a space that wasn't found during the original searches." The ground-penetrating radar survey began in the school's main hallway, with Dr. Hayes and her team methodically mapping the subsurface structure of the building. What they found would shock everyone involved in the investigation. "There's definitely a void space beneath the eastern wing of the building," Dr. Hayes announced after 3 hours of scanning. "It's approximately 12 feet by 20 feet, located directly under what used to be the custodial office." The discovery of a hidden basement space that didn't appear on any official building plans immediately raised disturbing questions. Who had access to this space? How long had it existed? And most importantly, was this where Jamie Morrison had been held? "We need to access that basement immediately," Detective Chen ordered, "but we need to do it carefully. This is potentially a crime scene that's been undisturbed for 30 years. The custodial office had been located in the eastern wing of the school, near the main entrance. In 1994, it had been the domain of Harold Hank Peterson, the school's head custodian, who had worked at Lincoln Elementary for over 20 years. Detective Sullivan pulled the original case files to review what investigators had learned about Peterson during the initial investigation. "He was interviewed twice in November 1994, Sullivan reported. "Both times he said he was working in the boiler room when Jamie disappeared. His story was consistent, and there was no evidence to suggest his involvement. But if there was a hidden basement room accessible from his office," Detective Chen mused, "he would have been the most likely person to know about it." The team decided to access the basement space through the floor of the former custodial office. Using careful archaeological techniques, they cut through the concrete floor and discovered a wooden trapdoor that had been concealed under decades of accumulated debris and floor coverings. When the trapdoor was finally opened, the smell that emerged made several investigators step back. It was the musty, stale odor of a space that had been sealed for years, mixed with something else that none of them wanted to identify. "We're going in with full hazmat protocols," announced Dr. Rodriguez. "This space has been sealed for decades, and we don't know what we're going to find." The basement room was accessed by a wooden ladder that descended about 8 feet into darkness. When crime scene lights illuminated the space, what they found was far worse than anyone had imagined. The basement was indeed about 12 feet by 20 feet, with rough concrete walls and a dirt floor. But it wasn't empty. Along one wall were the remains of what appeared to be makeshift living quarters, a dirty mattress, empty food containers, a bucket, and most disturbing of all, children's clothing and toys scattered around the room. "My God!" whispered Detective Chen as she surveyed the scene. This was a prison. But the most shocking discovery was yet to come. Scratched into the concrete walls were dozens of messages, carved with the same desperate urgency as the message found in the desk upstairs. Names, dates, pleas for help, evidence that multiple children had been held in this hidden basement over an extended period of time. Among the carved messages, investigators found Jamie Morrison, Nov, 1994, "Help me." Sarah Collins, March, 1993, "I want my mom." Tommy Wright, Dec, 1994, "Please find me." Lisa Park, Feb, 1995, "He hurt me." Dr. Rodriguez carefully documented each carving while crime scene photographers captured every detail. "We're looking at evidence of multiple kidnappings," she announced. "This basement was used to hold children captive over a period of at least 2 years. Detective Chen immediately contacted the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit and requested assistance with what was clearly a serial predator case. Within hours, federal agents were on scene, and the investigation had expanded into a multi-agency task force. Special Agent Maria Santos from the FBI's Child Abduction Rapid Deployment Team took one look at the basement and knew they were dealing with something unprecedented. "This is one of the most sophisticated child predator operations I've ever seen," she told the assembled investigators. "Whoever did this had long-term access to the school and the ability to move children in and out without detection." The forensic examination of the basement revealed additional disturbing evidence. DNA analysis of hair and fabric samples found throughout the room confirmed the presence of multiple children. Carbon dating of some materials suggested the room had been in use from approximately 1992 to 1996. The timeline corresponds with Harold Peterson's employment at the school, noted Detective Sullivan. He started as head custodian in 1991 and retired abruptly in early 1996. But when investigators tried to locate Harold Peterson for questioning, they discovered he had died in 2008, taking whatever secrets he might have had to his grave. However, his personnel files revealed some troubling information that had been overlooked during the original investigation. Peterson had been questioned by police in 2 other states regarding missing children, reported FBI agent Jennifer Walsh, who had been reviewing his background. In 1989 in Vermont and 1990 in New Hampshire, children disappeared from schools where Peterson had been working as a maintenance contractor. No charges were ever filed, but the pattern is unmistakable. The investigation into Peterson's background revealed a disturbing history of seeking employment at elementary schools and youth organizations. He had worked at 7 different schools across New England between 1985 and 1996, and in 5 of those locations, children had gone missing during his tenure. He was a serial predator who specifically targeted schools, Agent Santos concluded. He would get hired as custodial staff, identify vulnerable children, and use his access to the building to abduct them. But the discovery of the basement raised even more troubling questions. If multiple children had been held there, what had happened to them? The carved messages suggested that at least 4 children besides Jamie had been imprisoned in the basement, but there were no missing person reports that corresponded to some of the names. Detective Chen assigned a team to investigate each name carved into the basement walls. What they discovered was a systematic pattern of child disappearances that had been overlooked because they occurred in different jurisdictions and were spread out over several years. Sarah Collins had indeed been reported missing from a school in New Hampshire in March 1993, while Peterson was working there as a substitute custodian. Tommy Wright had disappeared from a different Connecticut school in December 1994, just weeks after Jamie Morrison. Lisa Park had vanished from a Massachusetts elementary school in February 1995. These disappearances were never connected because they happened in different states and were investigated by different agencies, explained Agent Walsh. Peterson was careful to never take more than 1 child from the same location in a short time period. The forensic examination of the basement also revealed evidence of how Peterson had managed to move children in and out of the school without detection. A hidden tunnel, barely large enough for a small person to crawl through, connected the basement to a storm drain system that ran beneath the school parking lot. He could bring children into the basement through this tunnel without anyone seeing them enter the building, Dr. Hayes explained. The tunnel exits about 200 yards away, behind a maintenance shed that's not visible from the main school. This discovery explained how Jamie Morrison could have been taken from his classroom and hidden in the basement without being seen on security cameras or by other staff members. Peterson, with his intimate knowledge of the building and its systems, had created the perfect hiding place. But the most disturbing question remained: what had ultimately happened to the children who had been held in the basement? Further excavation of the basement area revealed additional hidden spaces, including what appeared to be a second room that had been sealed with concrete at some point in the mid-1990s. Ground-penetrating radar indicated the presence of organic material in the sealed room. "We need to access that second room," Detective Chen announced grimly, "but we need to prepare for what we might find." The decision was made to carefully break through the concrete seal using archaeological techniques. As the wall was slowly opened, crime scene investigators prepared for the worst. What they found confirmed their darkest fears. The sealed room contained the skeletal remains of at least 3 children, along with personal items that corresponded to some of the names carved into the basement walls. DNA analysis would later confirm that the remains belonged to Sarah Collins, Tommy Wright, and Lisa Park. Harold Peterson wasn't just kidnapping these children, Agent Santos said grimly. He was murdering them and hiding their bodies in this sealed room. But conspicuously absent from the sealed room were any remains that could be identified as Jamie Morrison. This raised a crucial question. Had Jamie somehow survived his captivity? The investigation team reviewed the carved messages more carefully, looking for clues about what might have happened to Jamie. His message was significantly different from the others. While the other children had carved simple pleas for help, Jamie's message was more detailed and seemed to indicate ongoing awareness of his situation. "They took me to the basement" suggests that Jamie knew he had been moved from one location to another, observed Dr. Rodriguez. The other messages don't show that level of situational awareness. Criminal psychologist Dr. Michael Chen was brought in to analyze the carved messages and provide insight into the children's experiences. Jamie's message suggests he may have been held for an extended period and was aware of what was happening to him, Dr. Chen concluded. The sophistication of his message compared to the others indicates he may have been older or more resilient. The investigation team began to develop a theory about what had happened to Jamie Morrison. Unlike the other victims, who appeared to have been killed relatively quickly, Jamie may have been held in the basement for weeks or months. His intelligence and resourcefulness, noted by his teachers, may have helped him survive longer than the other children. Jamie was an exceptional child, his former teacher, Mrs. Wells, told investigators when they re-interviewed her. He was incredibly smart and observant. If anyone could have figured out how to survive in a terrible situation, it would have been Jamie. But if Jamie had survived his initial captivity, where was he now? The investigation expanded to include the possibility that Jamie Morrison might still be alive, now 38 years old, and possibly living somewhere under a different identity. FBI databases were searched for any adults who had appeared in the system around 1996 with no verifiable childhood history. Social services records were reviewed for any children who had been found abandoned or with mysterious backgrounds during the mid-1990s. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Dr. Lisa Park, a social worker in California, contacted the FBI hotline after seeing news coverage of the basement discovery. Her name had triggered an automated alert in the system because it matched one of the victims found in the sealed room. "I'm not the Lisa Park you found," she told Agent Santos during a video call, "but I think I might know who Jamie Morrison is." Dr. Park explained that in 1996 she'd been working at a children's shelter in Oregon when a boy estimated to be about 10 years old was brought in by someone who claimed to have found him wandering alongside a highway. The boy had no memory of his identity, his family, or how he had ended up alone. He was traumatized, malnourished, and couldn't remember anything about his past, Dr. Park recalled. "We called him David because he couldn't tell us his real name. He was eventually adopted by a family in Portland." The description Dr. Park provided matched Jamie Morrison perfectly. Sandy brown hair, green eyes, small for his age, and exceptionally intelligent, despite his trauma. Most significantly, the boy had a small scar on his left hand that exactly matched a scar described in Jamie's medical records. David, or Jamie, was adopted by the Morrison family in Portland, Dr. Park continued. But here's the interesting thing. He insisted on keeping the last name Morrison, even though he couldn't remember why. The adoption counselors thought it might have been a subconscious memory of his real family. Agent Santos immediately contacted the Portland Police Department and the Oregon Department of Social Services to locate the adoption records. What they found was a now 38-year-old man named David Morrison, working as a teacher in Portland and living a quiet, normal life with no knowledge of his true identity. "We need to approach this very carefully," Agent Santos told Detective Chen. "If this man is really Jamie Morrison, we're about to turn his entire world upside down." The decision was made to contact David Morrison through the Portland Police Department, with trained counselors standing by to help him process what could be life-changing information. Detective Lisa Chang from Portland PD made the initial contact. "Mr. Morrison," she said when she reached him by phone, "I'm calling because we believe you may have information that could help us solve a missing person case from Connecticut. Would you be willing to speak with us?" David Morrison agreed to meet with Detective Chang, though he was puzzled about what information he could possibly have about a case in Connecticut. When they met at the Portland Police Department, Detective Chang began with gentle questions about his childhood and adoption. "I don't remember anything before I was about 10 years old," David explained. "The doctor said it was probably due to trauma, but I've never been able to recover those memories. My adoptive parents were wonderful, and I've had a good life, but there's always been this feeling that something was missing." When Detective Chang showed him photographs of Jamie Morrison from 1994, David stared at them for a long time. "He looks familiar," he said slowly, "like looking at a photograph of myself as a child, but I don't remember it being taken." The DNA test results confirmed what everyone had begun to suspect. David Morrison was indeed Jamie Morrison, the 8-year-old boy who had vanished from his classroom 30 years earlier. The news was devastating and liberating at the same time. David, Jamie, had survived Harold Peterson's basement prison, but had lost all memory of his early life, including his mother Linda, who had never stopped searching for him. 30 years, Linda Morrison whispered when Detective Chen called to tell her the news. "My baby has been alive for 30 years, and I didn't know." The reunion between Linda Morrison and her son was arranged carefully, with psychologists present to help both of them navigate the complex emotions involved. When they met in a conference room at the Connecticut State Police headquarters, Linda saw immediately that this was her Jamie, despite the 3 decades that had passed. "I knew you were alive," she told him through tears. "A mother knows. I never stopped believing I would see you again." For Jamie, who still thought of himself as David, the meeting was overwhelming. Slowly, with the help of therapists and the detailed evidence from the basement, fragments of his memory began to return. He remembered being taken from his classroom, the terror of the basement, and eventually escaping through the tunnel system during what he now realized was Peterson's final attempt to transport him to a different location. "I remember crawling through a tunnel," Jamie told investigators during one of many debriefing sessions. "It was dark and scary, but I knew I had to get away. I remember being very cold and hungry, and then someone found me and took me to a place with other children." The investigation concluded that Jamie had managed to escape from Peterson's custody during the custodian's attempt to move him to another location, possibly when the heat from the initial investigation became too intense. Peterson had sealed the basement room containing the other victims and retired from the school, but Jamie had already escaped and eventually made his way to Oregon, where his new life began. Harold Peterson's reign of terror had finally been exposed, 30 years after his crimes. The discovery of the basement and the identification of his victims provided closure for families who had waited decades for answers, and justice for children whose voices had been silenced for far too long. But for Linda Morrison and her son Jamie, the discovery marked not just the end of a terrible mystery, but the beginning of a new chapter in their lives together. The conference room at Connecticut State Police headquarters had never hosted a reunion quite like this one. On a grey November morning in 2024, exactly 30 years and 9 days after 8-year-old Jamie Morrison had vanished from his classroom, His mother, Linda, finally embraced the son she had never stopped believing was alive. Dr. Patricia Wells, the trauma counselor assigned to facilitate the reunion, watched as Linda Morrison studied the face of the 38-year-old man sitting across from her. 3 decades had transformed her little boy into a grown man with his father's strong jawline and her own green eyes. But Linda knew instantly that this was her Jamie. "You have a scar on your left hand," Linda whispered, reaching tentatively toward him. "You got it when you were 5, trying to help me cut vegetables for dinner. You were so proud to be helping in the kitchen." David Morrison, still thinking of himself by that name despite the DNA confirmation, looked down at the small, crescent-shaped scar he'd carried all his life. "I've always wondered about this scar," he said quietly. "My adoptive parents never knew how I got it." "You cried so hard when it happened," Linda continued, tears streaming down her face. "But you insisted on getting back up on the counter to help me finish cooking. You said big boys don't give up. You were always so determined, so brave." Dr. Wells had overseen dozens of family reunifications during her career, but the Morrison case was unique. Most cases involved recently found children who retained at least some memory of their families. Jamie's case was complicated by 3 decades of separation and nearly complete memory loss due to trauma. "This process will take time," Dr. Wells explained to both Linda and Jamie. "Recovering repressed memories can be overwhelming, and rebuilding a relationship after 30 years presents unique challenges. We need to proceed carefully." Over the following weeks, Jamie began the difficult process of recovering his lost childhood. The evidence from the basement, combined with items his mother had preserved from his early life, slowly began to unlock memories that had been buried by trauma. "I remember this," Jamie said during one session, holding his old teddy bear that Linda had kept in his unchanged bedroom. "His name was Brownie? No, Bruno. His name was Bruno, and I took him everywhere." "You insisted on bringing Bruno to your first day of school," Linda smiled through her tears, "but you were embarrassed about it, so you kept him hidden in your backpack." Each recovered memory was like a piece of a puzzle slowly coming together. Jamie remembered the blue backpack he'd carried to school, the way Mrs. Wells always smelled like vanilla perfume, the excitement he'd felt about his upcoming book report on dinosaurs. But the most important memories, the ones that would help bring justice to other victims, were the traumatic ones from the basement. Working with FBI behavioral specialists, Jamie began to reconstruct the horrific weeks he'd spent as Harold Peterson's prisoner. "I remember being very confused at first," Jamie told Agent Santos during one of their carefully managed interviews. "One minute I was at my desk, working on my worksheet about Native Americans, and the next minute I was in this dark place that smelled terrible." Through a combination of hypnosis, guided memory recovery, and therapeutic techniques, Jamie's recollections began to surface. He remembered Peterson approaching him in the classroom while Mrs. Wells was writing on the blackboard, telling him there was a special project he needed to help with in the basement. "He said Mrs. Wells had sent me to help him fix something," Jamie recalled. "I was a good kid who always followed rules, so when a grown-up at school told me to come with him, I did." Jamie's memories revealed the horrific reality of what had happened in the basement. He had been held there for approximately 6 weeks, during which time he had encountered some of the other children whose names were carved into the concrete walls. "Sarah was there when I arrived," Jamie remembered, his voice breaking. "She was so scared, and she kept crying for her mom. She'd been there for a long time. She told me about the other kids who had been there before me." Jamie's testimony provided crucial evidence about Peterson's methods and the timeline of his crimes. The custodian had been systematic in his abuse, keeping detailed schedules and maintaining the basement as a horrific prison where he held children for weeks or months at a time. "He would leave us food and water, but not very much," Jamie continued. He told us that if we were quiet and did what he said, he would let us go home eventually. But Sarah said the other kids had never gone home. The most heartbreaking aspect of Jamie's recovered memories was his account of trying to protect the younger children and his desperate attempts to escape. "I tried to dig at the walls with my fingernails," he remembered. "That's when I scratched my name and the message asking for help. I thought maybe if someone found it someday, they would know what happened to us." Jamie's superior intelligence and problem-solving abilities, noted by his teachers before his disappearance, had ultimately saved his life. He had spent weeks studying the basement, mapping out Peterson's routines and looking for opportunities to escape. "I found the tunnel by accident," Jamie explained. "I was trying to hide from him in the corner when I felt air moving through a crack in the wall. I spent days working to make the opening bigger, using pieces of concrete that had broken off." Jamie's escape had come during what investigators now believed was Peterson's plan to move him to another location. The heat from the massive search effort in late December 1994 had made Peterson nervous, and he had decided to transport Jamie away from the school. "He came down one night and said we were going on a trip," Jamie remembered. "But I had just finished making the hole in the wall big enough to crawl through. When he went back upstairs to get something, I squeezed through the tunnel." Jamie's harrowing journey through the storm drain system had led him nearly 2 miles away from the school, where he emerged disoriented and hypothermic near a highway. A passing truck driver had found him and taken him to a hospital, where his severe trauma had caused the memory loss that had protected him for 30 years. "The mind sometimes protects itself by forgetting things too painful to remember," explained Dr. Sarah Martinez, the neuropsychologist working with Jamie. "His brain essentially created a new identity to survive the trauma of what he'd experienced." While Jamie worked to recover his memories and rebuild his relationship with his mother, the FBI was building a comprehensive case against Harold Peterson's legacy of crimes. Even though Peterson was dead, the evidence found in the basement had provided closure for multiple families and helped solve several cold cases across New England. The bodies found in the sealed basement room were positively identified as Sarah Collins, Tommy Wright, and Lisa Park. Their families, who had waited decades for answers, finally had the painful closure they had sought. "Knowing what happened to Sarah doesn't bring her back," said Margaret Collins, Sarah's mother, during a press conference. "But at least now I know she's not out there somewhere, scared and alone. I can finally let her rest in peace." The investigation had also led to the discovery of additional burial sites on property once owned by Peterson in Vermont and New Hampshire. Ground-penetrating radar surveys revealed the remains of at least 3 more children, all victims of the same systematic predator who had operated for over a decade. Harold Peterson was one of the most prolific serial killers of children in American history, Agent Santos told the media. His crimes spanned multiple states and more than a decade. We estimate he was responsible for the deaths of at least 8 children and the abduction of several others. The case had also exposed serious failures in background check systems and interagency communication that had allowed Peterson to move from school to school without detection. New federal legislation was proposed to prevent similar cases in the future. The Jamie Morrison Protection Act would require enhanced background checks for all school employees with access to children, create a national database of individuals suspected of crimes against children, and mandate improved communication between law enforcement agencies investigating child disappearances. For Mrs. Patricia Wells, Jamie's 3rd-grade teacher, who had carried guilt about his disappearance for 30 years, learning the truth about what had happened brought both relief and renewed anguish. "I blamed myself for not watching him more carefully," Mrs. Wells said when she met with Jamie during his recovery process. "I thought I had failed you as a teacher." "You didn't fail me," Jamie assured her. "You were a wonderful teacher, and Peterson was a predator who fooled everyone. He used his position of trust to hurt children, but that wasn't your fault." The reunion between Jamie and his childhood friends from Lincoln Elementary was emotional and healing for everyone involved. Melissa Chen, who had sat next to him in third grade, had become a pediatrician partly because of her experience with Jamie's disappearance. "I went into medicine because I wanted to help protect children," Melissa explained. "Jamie's disappearance changed all of us. We never felt completely safe again, but knowing he survived gives me hope." The most challenging aspect of Jamie's reintegration was rebuilding his relationship with his mother, Linda. 30 years of separation couldn't be erased overnight, and both struggled with the reality that they were essentially strangers who shared a profound biological and emotional connection. "She's my mother and I love her," Jamie said during a therapy session. "But I'm also 38 years old, and I've lived my entire adult life without her. We're having to learn how to be family again." Linda faced her own challenges in accepting that her little boy had become a grown man with his own life, career, and relationships. She had to reconcile her memories of 8-year-old Jamie with the reality of David Morrison, the successful teacher who had built a life in Portland. "I know I can't get back the 30 years we lost," Linda said, "but I'm grateful for every day I have with him now. He's an amazing man, and I'm so proud of who he became, despite everything he went through." The healing process was gradual but meaningful. Jamie began visiting Connecticut regularly, staying in his childhood room that Linda had preserved exactly as he'd left it. Slowly, he started to remember more details about his early life and his relationship with his mother. "I remember you used to read to me every night," Jamie said during one visit, looking through photo albums from his childhood. "You would do different voices for all the characters, and I thought you were the best storyteller in the world." "You would always ask for just one more story," Linda laughed. "I'd end up reading 3 or 4 books before you'd finally go to sleep." Jamie also began to understand the depth of his mother's love and the scope of her search for him. Linda showed him boxes of newspaper clippings, correspondence with investigators, and records of the thousands of tips she had followed over the years. "You never gave up," Jamie said, overwhelmed by the evidence of his mother's 3-decade search. "Even when everyone else thought I was dead, you kept looking." "A mother knows," Linda replied, repeating the phrase that had sustained her through 30 years of uncertainty. "I felt in my heart that you were alive somewhere." The broader impact of the Jamie Morrison case extended far beyond one family's reunion. The discovery of Peterson's crimes had prompted a comprehensive review of school security practices and background check procedures across the country. Lincoln Elementary School, which had been scheduled for demolition, was instead converted into a memorial and training center for school safety professionals. The basement where children had been held was sealed permanently, but the building became a place where educators and law enforcement officers learned about predator identification and child protection. Jamie's story teaches us that we can never be too careful when it comes to protecting our children, said Dr. Robert Chen, director of the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, during the memorial dedication. His survival and recovery also shows us that even in the darkest circumstances, there is hope. The Jamie Morrison Foundation, established by Linda Morrison with support from her son, became a leading advocate for missing children and their families. The foundation funded research into trauma recovery, supported families of missing children, and worked to improve investigative techniques for child abduction cases. If Jamie's story can help even one other family find their missing child, then something good will have come from all this pain, Linda said during the foundation's launch ceremony. For Jamie himself, the recovery process was ongoing but hopeful. He maintained his life in Portland while building new relationships with his Connecticut family and processing the traumatic memories that continued to surface. "I'm not the same person I would have been if this hadn't happened to me," Jamie reflected during a television interview about his experience. "But I'm grateful for the life I've built and the family I've recovered. I want to use my experience to help other survivors." Jamie's work as a teacher took on new meaning as he became an advocate for child safety education. He developed programs to help children recognize dangerous situations and trusted adults who could help them if they felt unsafe. "Children need to know that there are adults who will believe them and help them," Jamie explained. "If I had known then what I know now about recognizing predatory behavior, maybe I could have avoided what happened to me." The case also led to advanced training for teachers and school staff about recognizing signs of predatory behavior among their colleagues. The fact that Peterson had operated undetected for so long while working in schools had exposed serious gaps in institutional protection of children. Dr. Emily Rodriguez, who had overseen the forensic investigation of the basement, became a leading expert on institutional child abuse cases. The Jamie Morrison case teaches us that predators often seek positions of trust and authority, she explained. "We must be vigilant about protecting children even from those we assume we can trust." Tai. As 2024 drew to a close, Jamie Morrison had begun to truly come home in every sense of the word. He spent Thanksgiving with his mother Linda for the first time in 30 years, in the same kitchen where she'd been preparing dinner on the day he disappeared. "I used to set a place for you at the table every Thanksgiving," Linda told him as they prepared the meal together. "I told everyone it was because I knew you'd come home someday." "I'm sorry it took so long," Jamie replied, embracing his mother. "You have nothing to be sorry for," Linda assured him. "You survived, and you found your way back to me. That's all that matters." The Christmas of 2024 marked a new beginning for the Morrison family. Jamie's childhood stocking, which Linda had hung every year for 30 years, finally held gifts that would actually be opened by the person they were intended for. For the other families affected by Harold Peterson's crimes, the resolution of the case brought a mixture of closure and continued grief. They would never have their children back, but they finally had answers and the knowledge that justice had been served, even if posthumously. Detective Sarah Chen, who had overseen the investigation from the discovery of the desk message to Jamie's reunion with his family, reflected on the case that had defined her career. "The Jamie Morrison case reminds us why we do this work," she said. "Sometimes it takes 30 years, but the truth eventually comes out. Families deserve answers, victims deserve justice, and survivors deserve to come home." On a warm spring day in 2025, Jamie Morrison returned to Lincoln Elementary School for the first time since his disappearance. The building was now the Lincoln Memorial Training Center, and Jamie was there to speak to a group of educators about child protection and trauma recovery. Standing in the classroom where he had once sat as an 8-year-old boy working on a social studies worksheet about Native Americans, Jamie looked out at an audience of teachers, administrators, and child protection specialists. 30 years ago, I was sitting right here when my life changed forever, he began. But today, I'm standing here as proof that even the worst experiences can't destroy the human spirit. I'm here as proof that children can survive unimaginable trauma and still build meaningful lives. Most importantly, Jamie continued, I'm here to remind all of you that you are the guardians of the children in your care. Your vigilance, your awareness, and your commitment to protection can prevent other children from experiencing what I went through. After his speech, Jamie walked to the spot where the desk with his carved message had been found. A simple plaque now marked the location. In memory of all children who have suffered in silence and in celebration of those who found their voice. Linda Morrison, now 67 years old, but more vibrant than she had been in decades, watched her son with pride and profound gratitude. The little boy who had disappeared from his desk on a Tuesday morning in 1994 had grown into a man dedicated to protecting other children and helping families heal from trauma. "He's exactly the person I always believed he would become," Linda said to Mrs. Wells, who had also attended Jamie's speech. "Strong, compassionate, and determined to make the world better for other children." As Jamie and Linda drove away from Lincoln Elementary School that afternoon, they passed the memorial garden that had been planted for the children who didn't survive Harold Peterson's crimes. They stopped to place flowers at the markers for Sarah Collins, Tommy Wright, Lisa Park, and the other victims whose names had been carved into the basement walls alongside Jamie's. "They helped save me," Jamie said quietly as they stood among the flowers. "Sarah told me about the other children who had been there before her. She helped me understand that I had to find a way to escape, or I would end up like them." "They're at peace now," Linda replied, "and their families finally have answers because of what you went through and what you remembered." The drive back to Linda's house took them past the storm drain where Jamie had emerged 30 years earlier, hypothermic and traumatized, but alive. A small memorial marker had been placed there as well, not to commemorate tragedy, but to celebrate survival and hope. As the sun set over Millbrook, Connecticut, Jamie Morrison sat in his childhood bedroom, now visiting as an adult son, rather than sleeping there as a missing child. The room still contained his 8-year-old toys and books, but it also now held photos of the life he had built in Portland and the relationships he had formed with his adoptive family. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't been taken?" Linda asked, as they looked through photo albums from Jamie's recovered childhood and his life in Oregon. "Sometimes," Jamie replied, "but I've learned that we can't change the past. We can only decide what to do with the future we have." Jamie Morrison had indeed found his way home, not just to the house where he had lived as a child, but to a place of peace with his past and hope for his future. The desk where he had carved his desperate plea for help had finally delivered its message, bringing justice to those who couldn't speak for themselves, and reuniting a family that had been torn apart by evil but held together by love. The boy who had vanished from his classroom in 1994 had become a man who used his voice to protect other children. The mother who had never stopped searching had found not just her son, but a renewed purpose in helping other families navigate their own dark journeys. And in a small Connecticut town, a mystery that had haunted a community for 30 years had finally been solved, bringing closure to some, justice to all, and hope to everyone who believed that even in the darkest circumstances, love and determination can ultimately triumph over evil. The name Jamie Morrison would no longer be associated only with a tragic disappearance. It would stand as a symbol of survival, resilience, and the unbreakable bond between a mother and her child. A bond strong enough to last 30 years and powerful enough to bring a lost boy home.